And good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Now, I want to remind you of the great two-book special that I'm offering through the rest of March 2023, U.S. orders only. Okay, my book, 8070, A Shadow of the Real End, ? And The Elements Shall Melt with Fervent Heat. If you order these books separately and paid separate shipping, it would cost you right at $48, okay? But for the rest of this month, again, March 2023, and U.S. orders only. I cannot make this offer for out of U.S. orders. I'm sorry, I wish I could. I just simply can't. But total delivered price, $32.50. It's going to save you $15. Excellent savings. So go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Wonderful tab right up at the very, very top. Just click on it and order the books. You'll be very, very glad that you did. Now, back to Isaiah chapter 66 and how it relates to the New Testament, how it relates to the time of the judgment of Matthew chapter 25. And here in Isaiah chapter 66, the Lord said that at the time in which that concept of heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool, where is the house that you will build me, when that was going to be brought to full force, and that God's new temple, his true messianic temple, was going to be the hearts and the lives of those of humble hearts, contrite spirits, and obedient lives. That was going to be his true dwelling place. But in the meantime, notice that the Lord says, as I read yesterday morning, notice again, and I keep going over this because it's absolutely so critical, because of the fact that Paul specifically, absolutely emphatically quotes from this text in Romans 10:22. When I called, no one answered. What did it mean in Isaiah as the Lord spoke of that coming time? What did it mean when he said, well, when I called, no one answered? Well, it meant really, really bad news for those who refused to answer. Likewise, that's precisely what it meant in Romans 10, when Paul quotes it. Listen to me, there's a consistent pattern throughout the entirety of the prophetic books, not only the prophetic books, but in the book of Judges, in Samuel, 1 King, 2 King, which of course are parallel to the prophetic books. But nonetheless, what do we find in those books? Pardon me. What we find in those books is that when Israel would sin, God would send, in the book of Judges, he would send his judges to call Israel back to the law. And they would refuse, and God would judge them. Thus, when God would call, when they refused, they were judged. All throughout the period of the kings, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, when God sent his prophets, in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, the Lord said, I sent my prophets to you early, rising up early, proclaiming to you, to call you back, to call you to me, but you would not listen. You killed my prophets. So what did God do? He destroyed them. That's the motif. That's the theme that lies behind this language of Isaiah chapter 66, verse 4. When I called, no one answered. To fail to see, we might even say, to refuse to see, that when in Romans chapter 10, 22, Paul quotes this text verbatim, that meant that Israel was facing impending judgment, imminent judgment. And somebody says, well, you can read Romans chapter 10. Nowhere does it say, well, when I called you did not answer, so I'm going to bring judgment on you, and it's coming real soon. No, it doesn't. It doesn't use that specific language. Hello, argumentum ad desperatum. Missing word hermeneutic. Folks, when we've got the consistent pattern from the period of the judges, the period of the kings, the period of both the united and the divided kingdoms, that when God called and when Israel refused, rejected the messengers, judgment was imminent. To try to divorce that pattern from Romans chapter 10 is simply not proper. There is no justification for rejecting that and saying, well, Preston, you're just reading something, pardon me, you're just reading something into the text of Romans chapter 10. Well, my goodness, what I'm so-called reading into the text is the entire pattern of the Old Testament of when God called, when they did not answer, judgment came. That's the pattern. Where is it different in Romans chapter 10? Which, oh, by the way, in Romans chapter 11, Paul quotes from Psalm 69. Let their table become a snare. That citation is extremely powerful in indicating that Paul was saying judgment was about to fall. Folks, we just cannot divorce passages from one another simply because explicit words, terms, or phrases are not used. We have to see the use of metalepsis, which means, okay, when a New Testament writer or when a biblical writer quoted a partial aspect, a partial part of an Old Testament prophecy, they were bringing that context over. They understood. They were communicating to their readers, okay, I am quoting to you from a text. I'm quoting part of that text, but the rest of that text meant, okay, this part that I'm quoting meant judgment was coming, or in some cases, blessings were coming. This is simply observing proper Hebraic hermeneutic. Now, as I promised, got to get to it because I've already talked long enough. God said, hear the word of the Lord, you who tremble at his word. Now, who are these who tremble at his word? Well, they are those who back here in verse 2. Who is it that I will look upon, the Lord posed? On the one who is poor and of contrite spirit, the one who trembles at my word. That's who he's talking about here in verse 5. Hear the word of the Lord, those of you who tremble at his word. Now watch. Your brethren who hated you, who cast you out for my name's sake. They said, oh, let the Lord be glorified, that we may see your joy. But they shall be ashamed. You see, we're reminded here of John chapter 15 and 16, in which Jesus said, the time is coming, speaking to his apostles, in which those who persecute you will believe that they are doing God a service. What did Paul say in Acts chapter 26? As he looked back on his life as a persecutor of God's people, he said, I thought to do many things contrary to the name of Jesus of Nazareth. Paul said, I thought I was doing God's will. Isn't that what is being said here in Isaiah 66 in this prophecy? Listen to me, the Lord said, as he spoke to those who trembled at his word, as he spoke to the righteous remnant, in other words, your brethren are going to cast you out. Oh my. What do we find on the pages of Acts? And in many of Paul's epistles for that matter. Well, let's see. As Paul preached in Ephesus and spent so long there, the unbelieving Jews stirred up the crowds and persecuted the saints. Same at Corinth. Same at Thessalonica. Same at Lystra. Everywhere Paul went, the unbelieving Jews cast him and those who accepted the word of the Lord, they cast them out of the synagogues. And that's the imagery. You know, in John chapter 12, verse 42, the apostle tells us that there were many of the rulers of the people who came to believe in Jesus, but for fear of being put out of the synagogue. I mean, isn't this the language of Isaiah 66? For fear of being put out of the synagogue, they would not confess him. Closet confessors. Private believers. You know, years and years and years ago, when I was a salesman on the road driving a truck, I actually picked up a hitchhiker on one occasion. I never should have done that, but nonetheless, nothing came of it, but nonetheless, dangerous thing to do. And of course, he didn't know it, but I had my weapon at my side over here. But anyway, we got to talking about faith. And I shared with him that I was a believer, and he said, oh, I believe. He said, I definitely believe in God. And he said, I don't have any doubts at all that Jesus, is the Son of God. But he said, I'll tell you right now, I would never, ever say that in public. He said, I'm not going to lose any friends because of my faith. And I was like, whoa. Some years ago, when the controversy over covenant eschatology was raging at the Maxwell Church of Christ, where I was preaching at the time, ultimately got terminated, there was a young man there, super nice guy. He drew me aside one night and he said, Don, I think what you're teaching is the truth. I really do. He said, I don't have any problem with it, but he said, I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to say so because I'm not going to lose any of my friends over this. Oh, okay, gotcha. For fear of being put out of the synagogue, they would not confess him. At what point of time, at what point do we say, okay, it's time to confess? Is the only time that you're willing to confess is when you are in the midst of those who believe exactly like you do, and it's in, shall we say, private, and so everybody's agreeing, and you're, well, yeah, I believe that. So it's not time to confess when there are those who disagree, who might look on us disapprovingly, that's never a time to confess. I said to one person on one occasion who expressed these kind of sentiments to me, I'm not going to speak up. I'm not going to cause controversy. I'm just not going to lose any friends over this. I said, well, what would you do then if a Muslim put a gun to your head and said, do you believe in Jesus? And they evidently hadn't thought about that, and they refused to answer. Well, I think I know what the answer would be if they were being honest with themselves. Well, if I'm not willing to lose any friends by confessing what I believe, then I'm certainly not going to be willing to lose my life. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, we're living in dangerous times in America. Do you understand how militantly the atheists and our government is persecuting Christianity right now? Are you aware of the fact that Muslim countries are actively persecuting Christians right now, and our government is virtually totally silent about that? Are you aware that right now in America, that some judges have made rulings that make it okay for employers to demand that their employees work on Sunday, and no religious freedom here, no provision for religious freedom. Are you aware that in America right now, some judges have okayed the closing of some church doors? Folks, we're living in dangerous times. So, even though Isaiah chapter 66 was clearly not predicting our day and our time, it was predicting the first century. It is, may I say, it's an eternal principle that, as Jesus said in John chapter 3, this is judgment, that light has come into the world and shine in the darkness, and men love darkness more than they like light. And so, the time was coming. It happened in the first century. Those who persecute you will think they are doing God a service. Well, that's not the case in America. The people who are leading this charge are atheists. They're agnostics. There are people who have bought completely, totally into the anti-Christian worldview. Folks, we need today a militant church. We need today militant believers, courageous believers willing to stand up and to speak out in spite of what the world says and does. Okay, sort of kind of off of my soapbox. Thanks for joining me. We'll get back to it tomorrow on the flip side. See you there.